Have you ever met someone who seemed absolutely perfect at first? Someone who understood you like no one else ever had, made you feel special and seen, but then suddenly they just disappeared? If you're nodding your head right now, there's a good chance you've encountered an INFJ personality type. And trust me, you're not alone in this confusing experience. Today we're diving deep into one of the most puzzling patterns in modern relationships. Why INFJs, those rare and mysterious personalities, tend to sweep people off their feet initially, only to vanish without a trace later on. It's a pattern that's left countless people scratching their heads, wondering what they did wrong, and questioning everything they thought they knew about connection and compatibility. 1. The INFJ enigma. Understanding the rarest personality type. Let's start with the basics. INFJs make up only about 1 to 3% of the population, earning them the title of the rarest personality type. They're often called the advocates or the counselors, and there's a reason for that. These individuals possess an almost supernatural ability to understand people on a level that feels almost psychic. When you first meet an INFJ, it's like meeting someone who's been waiting their whole life just to understand you. They have this incredible gift for seeing past your surface-level persona and connecting with who you really are underneath. It's intoxicating, honestly. They make you feel like you're the most interesting person in the world. But here's where things get tricky. This same depth that makes them so appealing initially is also what makes them so likely to pull away later. INFJs are complex beings who live primarily in their inner world of thoughts, feelings, and possibilities. They're constantly processing, analyzing, and trying to understand not just you, but themselves and the entire universe around them. This internal complexity means that what you see on the surface is often just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more going on beneath that calm, understanding exterior. And sometimes that more includes doubts, fears, and internal conflicts that can lead them to retreat without warning. 2. The initial attraction. Why INFJs are so magnetic. So what makes INFJs so incredibly attractive in the beginning? It's not just one thing. It's a perfect storm of qualities that create an almost irresistible combination. First, there's their listening ability. INFJs don't just hear your words. They listen to your soul. When you're talking to an INFJ, you feel truly heard, maybe for the first time in your life. They're not waiting for their turn to speak or thinking about what they're going to say next. They're completely present with you in that moment, absorbing not just your words, but your emotions, your body language, your energy. Then there's their empathy. INFJs have this remarkable ability to feel what you're feeling, sometimes even before you realize you're feeling it yourself. They can sense your mood shifts, your hidden anxieties, your unspoken dreams. This creates an immediate sense of intimacy and connection that's absolutely addictive. Add to that their mysterious nature. INFJs reveal themselves slowly in layers. Just when you think you figure them out, they show you another facet of their personality that surprises and delights you. They're like a book you can't put down, always promising more depth and revelation just around the corner. Their creativity and vision are also incredibly attractive. INFJs are often artists, writers, dreamers, and visionaries. They see possibilities where others see obstacles. They talk about changing the world, making a difference, creating something beautiful and meaningful. Being around that kind of passion and purpose is energizing and inspiring. 3. The honeymoon phase, when everything feels perfect. During those early days or weeks, everything feels magical. The INFJ seems to understand you better than anyone ever has. They remember little details about things you mentioned in passing. They send you thoughtful messages that show they've been thinking about you. They share their dreams and visions with you, making you feel like you're part of something special and important. This is when the INFJ is operating from their strongest suit, their ability to connect and understand. They're genuinely fascinated by you as a person. They want to know your story, your dreams, your fears, your hopes. They're not just collecting information. They're trying to understand the essence of who you are. During this phase, the INFJ is also likely putting their best foot forward. They're excited about the connection, hopeful about the possibilities, and willing to be vulnerable and open. They might share things with you that they've never shared with anyone else. They might talk about their vision for the future, their dreams of making a difference in the world, their hopes for meaningful relationships. The conversations during this time are often deep and meaningful. You're not talking about the weather or what you had for lunch. You're discussing life philosophy, dreams for the future, childhood memories that shaped who you became, fears that keep you up at night. It's intoxicating to have these kind of conversations with someone who not only understands, but also contributes their own insights and perspectives. For the internal struggle, what happens inside the INFJ's mind? But while you're basking in the glow of this amazing connection, something complicated is happening inside the INFJ's mind. They're starting to process everything, and I mean everything. Every conversation, every interaction, every feeling, every possibility for the future. INFJs are notorious overthinkers, but it's not just random worrying. They're trying to understand the deeper meaning of everything. They're asking themselves questions like, is this connection real, or am I just projecting what I want to see? Are we truly compatible, or are we just enjoying the novelty? What would a future with this person actually look like? Am I being authentic, or am I showing them what I think they want to see? This internal processing can be overwhelming. INFJs have incredibly high standards for relationships, not in terms of what their partner should be, but in terms of authenticity, depth, and genuine connection. They're not interested in surface-level relationships or connections based on convenience or physical attraction alone. They want something real, something meaningful, something that feeds their soul. As they process the relationship, they might start to notice things that concern them. Maybe they realize they've been idealizing you or the relationship. Maybe they start to see incompatibilities that weren't obvious at first. Maybe they recognize patterns from past relationships that didn't work out. Or maybe they just start to feel overwhelmed by the intensity of their own emotions. 5. The perfectionist trap. Why INFJs struggle with reality. Here's something that many people don't understand about INFJs. They're often perfectionists, but not in the way you might think. They don't expect you to be perfect, but they do expect the relationship to be authentic, meaningful, and aligned with their values and vision. INFJs have this tendency to see the potential in people and situations. When they first meet you, they don't just see who you are now. They see who you could become, what the relationship could evolve into, how you could grow together. This is beautiful, but can also be problematic. Sometimes, the reality of day-to-day relationship dynamics doesn't match up with their vision of what the relationship could be. They might start to feel disappointed, not necessarily in you as a person, but in the gap between potential and reality. They might realize they've been more in love with the idea of the relationship than with the actual relationship itself. This realization can be crushing for an INFJ. They invest so much emotional energy into their connections, and when they start to doubt whether those connections are as real or meaningful as they initially believed, it can trigger a crisis of faith, not just in the relationship, but in their own judgment and ability to connect with others. 6. The overwhelm factor, when connection becomes too much. Another factor that contributes to INFJ ghosting is simply overwhelm. Remember, INFJs are highly sensitive people who absorb emotions and energy from their environment. A new relationship, especially an intense one, can be emotionally exhausting. During the honeymoon phase, they're not just dealing with their own emotions about the relationship. They're also picking up on and processing your emotions. They're trying to understand not just what you're saying, but what you're feeling, what you need, what you're afraid of. This emotional labor can be incredibly draining. Add to that their own internal processing, analyzing every conversation, looking for deeper meanings, trying to understand where the relationship is heading, and you've got a recipe for emotional exhaustion. Sometimes, the INFJ reaches a point where they just need space to process everything that's happening. The problem is they're often not good at communicating this need for space. They might not even fully understand it themselves. They just know they're feeling overwhelmed and need to retreat. Unfortunately, this retreat often comes without explanation. leaving their partner confused and hurt. 7. The fear of vulnerability, why opening up becomes scary. INFJs are naturally private people, but during the initial stages of a relationship, they often open up more than usual because they're excited about the connection. They share their dreams, their fears, their vision for the future. They let you see parts of themselves that they usually keep hidden. But as the relationship progresses, they might start to feel exposed and vulnerable. They realize they've shown you their true self, with all their quirks, dreams, and insecurities. This can be terrifying for someone who values privacy and authenticity as much as INFJs do. They might start to worry about how you're interpreting the things they've shared. Are you taking their dreams seriously? Or do you think they're unrealistic? Do you understand their need for alone time? Or do you see it as rejection? Are you accepting of their quirks and unconventional thinking? Or are you just tolerating them? This fear of being misunderstood or not truly accepted for who they are can cause them to pull back. They might decide it's safer to retreat than to risk further vulnerability and potential rejection. 8. The compatibility crisis, when differences become deal breakers. As INFJs get to know someone better, they often start to notice differences that weren't apparent initially. These might be differences in values, life goals, communication styles, or ways of processing emotions. For example, an INFJ who values deep, meaningful conversations might realize that their partner prefers lighter, more casual interactions. An INFJ who needs significant alone time might find that their partner requires constant togetherness. An INFJ who's driven by a sense of purpose and meaning might discover that their partner is more focused on practical concerns like career advancement or financial security. None of these differences are necessarily bad, but they can create a sense of incompatibility for the INFJ. Because they're looking for such deep, authentic connections, even small misalignments can feel significant. They might start to question whether the relationship has long-term potential. Rather than discussing these concerns openly, which would be the healthy approach, many INFJs choose to retreat and process internally. They might convince themselves that it's better to end things before anyone gets more hurt, or they might simply feel too overwhelmed by the incompatibilities to continue. 9. The communication breakdown, why INFJs go silent. One of the most frustrating aspects of being ghosted by an INFJ is the lack of communication. You might be expecting a conversation about whatever issues are arising, but instead, you get silence. This isn't necessarily because the INFJ doesn't care about you or your feelings. It's often because they're struggling with how to communicate what they're experiencing. INFJs are often conflict-avoidant. They hate hurting people's feelings, and are usually very aware of how their words and actions affect others. When they're feeling doubts about a relationship, they might be paralyzed by the thought of having to communicate those doubts and potentially hurt someone they care about. They might also be struggling to articulate exactly what they're feeling. Their internal world is complex and nuanced, and they might not have the words to explain their doubts, fears, or concerns. They know something doesn't feel right, but they can't necessarily put their finger on what it is or how to explain it. So instead of having a potentially difficult conversation, they choose silence. They retreat into their inner world to process, hoping that either their feelings will change or that the situation will resolve itself somehow. Unfortunately, this silence often comes across as rejection or abandonment to their partner. 10. The self-protection mechanism, guarding their energy. INFJs are naturally giving people. They want to help, support, and understand others. But this generosity of spirit can sometimes lead to them feeling drained or taken advantage of. When they start to feel like they're giving more than they're receiving in a relationship, they might retreat as a form of self-protection. This doesn't mean they're keeping score or that they expect exact reciprocity. But INFJs need to feel like their emotional investment is appreciated and valued. If they start to feel like they're the only one putting effort into understanding and connecting, they might pull back to protect their energy and emotional well-being. They might also retreat if they feel like the relationship is becoming too demanding or high maintenance. INFJs have limited social energy, and they need significant time alone to recharge. If a relationship starts to feel like it's consuming too much of their emotional resources, they might decide it's not sustainable. 11. The pattern recognition, learning from past relationships. Many INFJs have experienced disappointment in past relationships. They might have a history of investing deeply in connections that ultimately didn't work out, leaving them feeling hurt and disillusioned. This experience can make them more cautious and more likely to retreat when they start to see patterns that remind them of past disappointments. For example, if an INFJ has been hurt by partners who initially seemed to appreciate their depth but later found them too intense or too much, they might retreat at the first sign that history might be repeating itself. They'd rather protect themselves from potential hurt than risk going through the same disappointment again. This pattern recognition can sometimes be inaccurate. They might retreat from a relationship that actually has potential because it reminds them of a past situation that didn't work out. But from their perspective, they're just trying to protect themselves from known patterns of disappointment. 12. The idealism versus reality struggle, when dreams don't match life. INFJs are natural idealists. They believe in the possibility of deep, meaningful connections and authentic relationships. But sometimes the reality of human relationships, with all their messiness, compromises, and imperfections, doesn't match up with their idealistic vision. This can create a painful internal conflict. On one hand, they want to believe in the relationship and its potential. On the other hand, they're confronted with the reality that relationships require work, compromise, and acceptance of imperfection. For an INFJ who's been dreaming of a perfect, effortless connection, this reality can be disappointing. Rather than adjusting their expectations or working through the challenges, some INFJs choose to retreat, hoping to find a connection that better matches their idealistic vision. This can lead to a pattern of repeatedly starting strong connections only to abandon them when reality doesn't match the dream. 13. The timing factor, when life gets in the way. Sometimes, INFJ ghosting has less to do with the relationship itself and more to do with what's happening in their life. INFJs are often going through periods of intense personal growth, career changes, or life transitions. They might be dealing with family issues, health problems, or major life decisions. When life gets overwhelming, INFJs often retreat into themselves to process and cope. Unfortunately, this retreat often extends to their relationships as well. They might not have the emotional bandwidth to maintain a new relationship while dealing with other major life stressors. The problem is they often don't communicate this to their partner. They might not want to burden them with their problems, or they might not even fully understand how much their life circumstances are affecting their ability to connect. So instead of explaining what's happening, they simply withdraw. 14. The fear of intimacy when getting close becomes terrifying. Despite their natural ability to connect with others, many INFJs actually struggle with true intimacy. They're comfortable being the one who understands and supports others, but being truly known and understood themselves can be frightening. As a relationship progresses and becomes more intimate, the INFJ might start to feel scared of being fully seen. They might worry that if their partner truly knows them, with all their complexities, contradictions, and imperfections, they'll be rejected or found lacking. This fear can cause them to sabotage the relationship before it reaches a level of intimacy that feels too vulnerable. They'd rather be the one who leaves than risk being left after being fully known. What this means for you: understanding and moving forward. If you've been ghosted by an INFJ, it's important to understand that it probably wasn't about you personally. INFJs who ghost are usually dealing with their own internal struggles, fears, and processing issues. They're not trying to hurt you. They're trying to protect themselves or make sense of their own complex emotions. This doesn't mean their behavior is okay or that you should excuse it. Ghosting is hurtful and immature, regardless of the reasons behind it. But understanding the why behind it can help you process the experience and move forward without taking it personally. It can also help you recognize the signs earlier in future relationships. If you're dating someone who seems to process everything internally, who has a pattern of intense connections followed by retreat, or who struggles with vulnerability and communication, you might be dealing with someone who has a tendency to ghost. Conclusion: the complex reality of INFJ relationships. The phenomenon of INFJs being initially admired but then ghosting is complex and multifaceted. It stems from their unique combination of deep empathy and sensitivity, high standards for authenticity, tendency to overthink and internalize, fear of vulnerability, and sometimes poor communication skills around difficult emotions. Understanding this pattern doesn't excuse the behavior, but can help both INFJs and their partners navigate relationships more successfully. For INFJs, recognizing these tendencies can be the first step toward developing better communication skills and learning to work through relationship challenges rather than running from them. For those who find themselves on the receiving end of INFJ ghosting, remember that it's rarely about you personally. It's usually about their own internal struggles and fears. While it's natural to feel hurt and confused, try not to take it as a reflection of your worth or the value of the connection you shared. The key to successful relationships with INFJs, or any personality type, really, is open communication, patience, and understanding. If you're in a relationship with an INFJ and you notice them starting to withdraw, try creating a safe space for them to share what they're processing. Ask gentle questions, offer reassurance, and give them the time and space they need to work through their thoughts and feelings. Remember, the same depth and sensitivity that makes INFJs so appealing initially also makes them more prone to overwhelm and retreat. With understanding, patience, and good communication, it's possible to work through these challenges and build lasting, meaningful connections. But it requires both partners to be willing to do the work of understanding each other's needs and communication styles. The goal isn't to change the INFJ or to avoid their tendency to process internally. The goal is to create a relationship dynamic where they feel safe enough to share their processing with you, where retreat doesn't mean abandonment, and where both partners can navigate the complex waters of human connection together.